The woman was the first to come to her senses and exclaimed, "Did the old man really say something about the divine jade?" The elderly man nodded, confirming his words. She looked at her grandfather, who could hardly stand on his feet, not understanding how he could know such great things. Shinny decided that the old man was lying, trying to save his life and the lives of his grandchildren. It didn't make sense to her that in such a godforsaken place, some ordinary hunter could know about divine jade. He was probably just confusing it with something else. The elderly man frowned, realizing that to save his family, he would have to prove to this woman that he was telling the truth. Looking her straight in the eye, the old man asked if they had heard anything about daehyops. Shinny frowned in surprise, and the warrior who was treating Midden immediately tensed up and looked at her grandfather carefully. Shinny wondered why this old man suddenly mentioned a place that had been destroyed by a demonic cult many years ago. Jinchu then introduced himself to those in front of them, stating that he was the last survivor of daehyops. His words had caused the listeners a real shock, but the grandfather had spoken sincerely, not a shadow of doubt in his voice. Shinny shouted at her grandfather, accusing him of lying, for she knew very well that all the inhabitants of daehyops had died and no one could have survived that horrible massacre. Besides, daehyops was the second strongest after Shaolin, and she realized that if her grandfather was who he said he was, he would have no trouble defeating her despite his age. In response, the old man unbuttoned his clothes and exposed his chest, revealing deep scars. He supplemented his words by explaining that on that day, decades ago, he had forfeited his martial arts by taking an oath that they would never again interfere in Chunwon's affairs. This statement stunned Shinny. Such a turn of events came as a complete surprise to her. Jinchu said that according to legend, the great master Shin Sung had created 8 divine jade beads, each of which granted its owner incomparable strength. Daehyopsa, being one of the main centers of martial arts, researched this legend. The materials of their research, known as the miracle of the 8 jades, had been passed down from generation to generation, and only one person knew anything about them after the demonic cult attacked the temple, himself. The woman listened intently to the old man's words, immersing herself in his story. Jinchu continued that from what the mercenaries and Shinny herself had said, they intended to collect these jade beads and give them to the Chancellor of the Hong Kingdom. The man took a step forward and remarked that they probably lacked knowledge about the true nature of these artifacts. Otherwise, Jucho wouldn't have sent his men to search for a needle in a haystack. Gathering his thoughts, Jinchu proposed a deal. He would be willing to guide the woman to the location where one of the jades might be, provided she spared his grandchildren. Shinny looked at the old man carefully, realizing that he clearly knew more than he was saying, and there was no hint of a lie in his words. The woman felt an aura emanating from Jinchu, causing her to feel incomprehensible anxiety and fear, as if he really did know too much. She felt goosebumps run through her body. His suggestion piqued Shinny's interest. If she had a chance to find the jade pearls with minimal effort, she couldn't pass up the opportunity. Jinchu's suggestion interested Shinny, but she couldn't trust the old man completely. Suspiciousness had always been her hallmark, and now, with her fate and possible greatness at stake, caution became even more necessary. Shinny slowly removed a strange lump from her robes and held it out to Jinch. The old man, looking at her with a question in his gaze, didn't understand what it meant. The woman explained that the lump was nothing more than a denigrating sleep pill. She explained that if the man tried to trick her, he would die in excruciating pain that would resemble endless insect bites all over his body. Jinchu frowned, but Shinny continued with cold-blooded certainty, adding that if he tried to trick her, his grandchildren would also suffer. The old man calmly replied that she shouldn't worry, as he never planned to deceive her, after which he swallowed the strange pill without hesitation. Han Dun watched in amazement. He continued to treat Midden, Jinchu's granddaughter, but found himself thinking more and more about the strangeness of the whole situation. The warrior felt guilty that this had all happened because of him, that his presence had led to the attack on Jinchu's home and the harm to his family. He finally decided to apologize to the old man, expressing his regret that he was the cause of this tragedy. Jinchu, in turn, also apologized, admitting that he had been unfriendly and unfair to Han-dun, which now made him feel ashamed. The man asked Han-dun to take care of his grandchildren, who were now left virtually alone. The warrior looked puzzled by this sudden errand, but did not object. Jinchu, looking at his grandson, felt a deep sadness. He wished he had never had the chance to tell Jinbek the whole truth about his origins and fate. The old man hoped that despite everything, his grandson would be able to live a decent life. Shinny and Jinchu set off, leaving behind the ruined village and Han-dun and her children. The woman regretted not being able to complete her plan and end Han-dun's life. In her heart she took it as a sign of fate, believing that their battle was still ahead of them, and she thought confidently that she would deal with the impudent warrior. Han-dun said nothing in reply, absorbed in his own thoughts. He was saddened by his own carelessness in failing to anticipate the treacherous traitor's actions. When Shinny and Jinchu left, he stayed with the children, continuing to treat Mitten slowly and patiently. The treatment was not easy. It required not only healing the wounds, but also completely removing the poison from the girl's body. The night in the Hong Kingdom changed to a sunny day. Bright rays of sunlight began to illuminate the ground, and one of them slid across Jinbek's face, causing him to open his eyes momentarily. The boy was still reeling from the horrors of the night before and was agitated. Abruptly jumping up from the ground, he looked around and his gaze fell on his sister sleeping nearby. The sight of her peaceful sleep brought him some relief. The last thing he remembered was trying to confront that mad woman and how his efforts had been in vain. Not far from the children sat Han-dun, absorbed in his own thoughts and tiredly watching Jinbek awaken. The warrior didn't know what to say to the boy, and Jinbek, dumbfounded by what he saw, didn't ask any questions yet, only looking around his surroundings in confusion. Jinbek realized that something unforeseen had happened, and the absence of his grandfather around made him uneasy. He, along with Han-dun, withdrew to the coast so as not to wake his sister, who was recovering from Shinny's attack. The warrior told what had happened the night after Jinbek had lost consciousness. He recounted his grandfather's brave act of sacrificing himself for the lives of his grandchildren and his last instruction to live a good life. Dumbfounded, Jinbek stared in front of him, unable to believe what he had heard. The thought of his grandfather willingly giving his life to save them seemed unbelievable and unfair. The boy, trying to cope with the feelings that came over him, asked Han-dun if his grandfather would be safe when he fulfilled his promise to Shinny. The warrior, unsure, replied that Jucho's wish centered on the power that the jade pearls gave. Even with the help of the likes of Jinchu, it was unlikely to change anything. Jinbek, not being comforted, asked again what would happen to his grandfather when Jucho got the desired stones. Han-dun answered with a silence that was more eloquent than any words. This answer filled the boy's soul with more fear and despair. Clenching his fists to the point of pain, Jinbek realized that he couldn't just leave things as they were. He didn't know what to do, how to help his grandfather, but he couldn't accept the fact that his own man might suffer a sad fate. In desperation he knelt before Han-dun, begging him for help. The warrior looked guiltily at the child, realizing his responsibility for what happened in Jinbek's house and could not remain indifferent. Jinbek, full of determination, said he knew that the warrior was also looking for the jade treasure. He suggested that Han-dun take him along, assuring him that he could save his grandfather when they met with Jucho. The boy felt strong within himself, remembering the night fight with Shinny, who, like Han-dun, was from Urim. He was willing to do anything for his family, especially after his younger sister and grandfather had suffered because of his weakness. Now he was eager to right his wrongs. Han-dun, tormented by guilt, tried to calm the boy down, telling him that what had happened was not his fault. However, Jinbek stubbornly stood his ground. Tears streamed from his eyes. He clutched his chest and cried out in despair that if he had been a little stronger, he would have been able to protect his grandfather and Midden. The boy begged Han-dun to make him strong, to teach him everything he knew himself, everything that allowed him to fight on the battlefield, so that he too could stand up to the villains. Lowering his head, Han-dun sighed and replied that Murim was no place for children's games. Jinbek tensed, realizing that he was facing a serious challenge, but he had a new dream. Han-dun continued, explaining that there were people in the world much stronger than those who had attacked their home in the night. He warned that he would meet many dangers along the way, and many people die along the way. Even Jinbek himself could become one of them. The warrior seriously asked if the boy was ready for such a life. Tears streamed down Jinbek's face. He sighed convulsively and pressed his lips tensely together as if dragging a hellish block of stone that was pressing on his heart. Jinbek curbed his emotions and resolutely stated that he would rather die than fail to protect his loved ones. Han-dun, understanding the depth of his feelings, looked at the young man and seriously told Jinbek to call him Han-dun from now on, thus recognizing their new bond and the boy's determination. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave comments to help the new video come out as soon as possible. Have a great day. Didn't even get to